Hello, all glory to Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So, continuing on from that last video where I was talking about the supposed discrepancies in the Bible, I did the first one. Let's go on to number 2. Now we'll do number 2 and 3 together. So number 2, in that count, so David did a census. In that count, how many fighting men were found in Israel? 800,000 or 1,100,000? And number 3, how many fighting men were found in Judah? 500,000 or 470,000. So the verses, and Joab gave up the sum of the number of the people unto the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men that drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. And Joab gave the sum of the number of people unto David, and all they of Israel were 1,000,000 and 100,000 men that drew the sword, and Judah was 410,000 men that drew the sword. Well, I found this website, did a search. Many alleged discrepancies in the Bible deal with numerical values being different from one book to the next. Several plausible ways exist to show that these differing numbers are not really discrepancies at all. It could be the case that the different authors were counting different groups of people or rounding off their numbers to different places. One such alleged discrepancy that involves differing numerical values is found between 1 Chronicles 21:5 and 2 Samuel 24:9. Obviously, the numbers given for the men of Israel differ by 300,000, while the numbers for the men of Judah differ by 30,000. Are there any plausible solutions to this alleged discrepancy? The truth of the matter is that there are several possible solutions. Let us deal first with the differing number of the men of Israel. The first possible solution is based on a closer reading of the text. When the two verses are compared, 1 Chronicles 21:5 says that all Israel had 1,100,000 men who drew the sword. But Samuel 2 says, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword. It could be that the author of 2 Samuel was indicating the number of seasoned veterans or valiant men, while the author of 1 Chronicles was numbering any man who drew the sword, not just the valiant ones. Gleason Archer concluded, a possible solution may be found along these lines. So far as Israel, i.e. the tribes north of Judah, is concerned, the First Chronicles figure includes all the available men of fighting age, whether battle seasoned or not. But from 2 Samuel 24, we learn that Joab's report gave a subtotal of mighty men, the battle-seasoned troops, consisting of 800,000 veterans. But in addition, there may have been 300,000 more men of military age who served in the reserves but had not yet been involved in field combat. These two contingents would make up a total of 1,100,000 men, as 1 Chronicles reports them, with employing the term Ishmael, the mighty man. So remember that the only thing required to prove that a discrepancy does not exist is to provide a single possible solution. Archer's explanation reveals quite clearly one possible solution. However, it is by no means the only one. Eric Vestrom lists another quite reasonable solution to the problem. There is another possibility that will be reasonable after examination. The reader should reread 1 Chronicles 27. Notice here that there are 12 divisions of 24,000 men each, giving a total of 288,000 men. It is possible that the chronicler counts these men, whereas the author of 2 Samuel does not. Notice that the 800 men in 2 Samuel were included in a census, as David wanted to know how many men there were for fighting. Yet as the numbers of divisions were apparently fixed at 24,000 per division, one would presumably not need to take a census of groups whose sizes are intrinsically defined by a priori fixed numbers. It is not requiring too much to state that it is reasonably possible that the author of 2 Samuel did not include these 288,000, while the different author of 1 Chronicles did. With two different authors writing apart from each other at non-identical times, it is not at all specious to assert a reasonable plausibility to a different mode of reckoning and reporting the census. These two explanations suffice to prove that the numbers of men in Israel are not irreconcilable. Moving further into the explanation of these two verses, we must look at the alleged discrepancy between the number of men who drew the sword in Judah. The author of 2 Samuel gives 500,000, while the author of 1 Chronicles gives 470,000, a difference of 30,000 men. Please note this is only a difference of 6%. A simple primary facey explanation would be that the authors were rounding to a different place. The chronicler rounded to the nearest 100,000, and the author of 2 Samuel rounding to the nearest 10,000. Some have objected, however, and claimed that a rounding error of 30,000 men is just not reasonable. This objection, which is based on a Western reading of the text that demands stiff, mathematically accurate numbers, does not allow for the more flexible use of numbers that often is exhibited in ancient Eastern times. However, the rounding solution is not the only one available. As Archer pointed out, so far as Judah was concerned, 2 Samuel 24 gives the round figure of 500,000, which was 30,000 more than the corresponding item in 1 Chronicles 21. It should be observed that 1 Chronicles 21:6 makes it clear that Joab did not complete the numbering, for he did not get around to a census of the tribe of Benjamin, nor that of Levi, either before David came under conviction about before David came under conviction about completing the census at all. But Levi and Benjamin counted he not among them, for the king's word was abominable to Joab. Joab was glad to desist when he saw the king's change of heart. The procedure for conducting the census had been to start with the Transjordan tribes, then to shift to the northernmost tribe of Dan and work southward, back toward Jerusalem. This meant that the numbering of Benjamin would have come last. Hence Benjamin was not included with the total for Israel, or that for Judah either, but in the case of 2 Samuel 24, the figure for Judah included the already known figure of 30,000 troops mustered by Benjamin, which lay immediately adjacent to Jerusalem itself. Hence the total of 500,000 included the Benjamite contingent. Observe that after the division of the United Kingdom into north and south, following the death of Solomon, most of the Benjamites remained loyal to the dynasty of David and constituted, along with Simeon to the south, the kingdom of Judah. Hence it was reasonable to include Benjamin with Judah and Simeon in the subtotal figure of 500,000, even though Joab may not have itemized it in the first report he gave to David. We can see, after looking closely at the two passages allegedly containing numeric contradictions, that several possible solutions do exist for the reconciling of the verses. Once again, God's inspired word shines forth as a beacon of truth, resisting every accusation of contradiction or discrepancy. So the fourth one here, supposed contradiction, God sent his prophet to threaten David with how many years of famine? So in 2 Samuel 24, so Gad came to David and told him, and said unto him, 7 years of famine shall 7 years of famine come unto thee in thy land, or wilt thou flee 3 months before thine enemies, while they pursue thee, or that there be 3 days pestilence in thy land? Now advise, and see what answer I shall return to him that sent me. And 1 Chronicles 21, so Gad came to David and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, choose thee either 3 years of famine, or 3 months to be destroyed by thy foes, while let the sword of thine enemies overtaketh thee, or else 3 days the sword of the Lord, even the pestilence in the land, and the angel of the Lord destroying throughout all the coasts of Israel. Now therefore advise thyself what word I shall bring again to him that sent me. So the first thing to note is that there had already been a famine in the land for 4 years. So there was a famine in the land in the days of David 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, It is for Saul and his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. So 3 years and year after year. So 3 plus 4 is 7. So Gad could have been saying to David, do you want 7 years of famine, as in the 3 additional years onto the 4 that has already been? Keep in mind that the conversation would have been longer than what was recorded here, and there are 2 different authors recording it, so perhaps they're recording different parts of the conversation, but they are saying essentially the same thing. One's saying, do you want 3 years of additional famine? And one's just saying, do you want 7 years of famine? So number 5, how old was Ahaziah when he began to rule over Jerusalem? 22 or 42? 22 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem, and his mother name was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri, king of Israel. And in Chronicles, 42 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem, and his mother's name also was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri. Okay, so I found another website here. How old was Ahaziah when he became king? In 2 Kings we are told that Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king. However, we are told in 2 Chronicles that Ahaziah was 42 years old when he became king. Obviously, at face value, these two verses give completely different ages. Clearly, as Ahaziah cannot be both 22 and 42 when he began to reign. So which was it? Let's use the Bible in order to work this out. Ahaziah, son of Jehoram. Ahaziah was the son of Jehoram, who was himself king of Judah. Ahaziah took over the kingdom from his father. In 2 Kings 8, in the 12th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, did Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, begin to reign. The Bible tells us that Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and Jehoram reigned for 8 years before he died, which would make Jehoram 40 years old at his death. And in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, being then king of Judah, Joram, son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. And 32 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. Clearly, Ahaziah was not literally 42 years old when his father died at 40. Ahaziah was physically 22 years old when he became king. So why does 2 Chronicles say that he was 42 years old when he began to reign? The most common answer given is an error on the part of the copyist, which is something I've noticed going through these things. It seems to be the easy conclusion that people make, which is extraordinarily frustrating because there are always other answers. Noting that Ahaziah could not have been 42, many new versions of the Bible have even changed the age in 2 Chronicles 22 from 42 to 22, and have noted that there was a scribal error and the correct number should have been 22. They have simply collapsed at the apparent discrepancy and succumbed to the accusation of an error and changed the age so that the age can be reconciled and the contradiction simply disappear, even though this then would demonstrate that the Bible did contain an error. So we see the NIV there changing the thing. Also found in the New Living Translation, ESV, and others. However, is a scribal error truly the answer, or is there a reason that the Bible records Ahaziah being both 22 and 42? Well, if we simply take the Bible at face value and do not go any further with trying to understand it, it's easy to say that there is simply an error here. However, what if there isn't a mistake? 42 years is the correct reading. What if we look for a meaning to this apparent contradiction from the Bible itself? Can the Bible itself explain the supposed contradiction? We are of course told that all scripture is given by the inspiration of God. And we are told to study to find ourselves approved unto God. That is exactly what we're going to do with the God-inspired texts. I have to say that it does surprise me, although I have to say I'm getting used to it, that very well-studied scholars stop at the error solution and do not in fact go any further. So again, let's see what the Bible has to say regarding the age 42. The KJV is not the only Bible that states 42, by the way. So does the Wycliffe, the Coverdale, and a bunch of others. In order to correctly understand what the Bible means, we have to go back into the Bible and do a little research. In both verses, we are told the age of Ahaziah. Where we are told the age of Ahaziah, we also get the added and rather important information in understanding this error. Ahaziah was of the line of Omri through his mother Athaliah, who was the daughter of Omri. We must note here that the daughter is in reference to the physical image of Omri, as Athaliah was actually his granddaughter and not literal daughter. But again, this lineage is important to understand the meaning of Ahaziah's recorded age in 2 Chronicles. Omri was the king of the northern tribes of Israel. As we know, Israel was split into two kingdoms, the northern tribes of Israel and the southern tribes of Judah. It is at this point in the reign of Jeroham, father of Ahaziah, when the two kingdoms integrated through marriage. Ahaziah's father, Jeroham, was king of Judah, as was his father, Jehoshaphat. However, Jeroham married the granddaughter of Omri, the king of Israel. Ahaziah was a produce of that integrated marriage. Ahaziah, therefore, had lineage of the southern kingdom of Judah through his father, but he also had the lineage of the northern kingdom through his mother. Jehoshaphat was a good king, doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Jeroham, however, he walked the way of Asa his father and departed not from it, doing that which is right in the sight of the Lord. Jeroham, however, unlike his father, walked after the kings of Israel, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, like as did the house of Ahab, for he had the daughter of Ahab to wife, and he wrought that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Jeroham walking after the kings of Israel is another piece of important information. Ahaziah also walked in the way of the house of Ahab and did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And he walked in the way of the house of Ahab and did evil in the sight of the Lord, as did the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. So we see that it was at the point of the integrated marriage that evil also integrated itself into the house of Judah. We are very clearly told that these kings of Judah followed the kings of Israel. Again, this is important information. The 42 years, as stated in 2 Chronicles, is actually important reference to the 42 years back to the reign of Omri, whose line, as we know, infiltrated the kingdom of Judah. We therefore need to go back and look at the story of Omri. Omri was made the king by the northern tribes of Israel. And the people that were encamped heard say, Zimri hath conspired, and hath also slain the king. Wherefore all Israel made Omri the captain of the host, king over Israel that day in the camp. And Omri went up from Gibbethon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tisra. Omri had ended the 7-day reign of Zimri. In the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, did Zimri reign 7 days in Tisra. Zimri had killed the king of Israel, Elah. In the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Elah, the son of Baasha, to reign over Israel in Tisra 2 years. And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariots, conspired against him, as he was in Tisra, drinking himself drunk in the house of Asa, steward of his house in Tisra. And Zimri went in and smote him, and killed him, in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. And it came to pass, when he began to reign, as soon as he sat on his throne, that he slew all the house of Baasha, and left him not one that pisseth against a wall, neither of his kinfolk, nor of his friends. The people encamped Zimri, and all Israel went up against him in Tisra. And the people were encamped against Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. And the people that were encamped heard say, Zimri hath conspired, and hath also slain the king. Wherefore all Israel made Omri, the captain of the host, king over Israel that day in the camp. And Omri went up from Gibbethon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tisra. Zimri, seeing that the city was taken, killed himself, going into the king's house and setting fire to it. And it came to pass, when Zimri saw that the city was taken, that he went into the place of the king's house, and burnt the king's house over him with fire, and died. However, we are told that some of the people followed Tibni, and made him king. The northern kingdom itself was now divided into 2, and had 2 kings, Omri and Tibni. Omri did not rule in Tisra, where Tibni was king. When were the people of Israel divided into 2 parts, half of the people followed Tibni, son of Ginath, to make him king, and half followed Omri. But Omri would eventually prevail over Tibni and become the sole king of the house of Israel. It was Omri, not Tibni, that would reunify the kingdom. Omri was the king for a total of 12 years, but he was only sole king over Israel for 6 years. But the people that followed Omri prevailed against the people that followed Tibni, the son of Ginath. So Tibni died, and Omri reigned. In the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, began Omri to reign over Israel 12 years. 6 years reigned he in Tisra. Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord, doing worse than all that were before him. But Omri wrought evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did worse than all that were before him. So we see that Omri reigned for 12 years, of which 6 were as the king over all the house of Israel. The 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, began Omri to reign over Israel 12 years. 6 years reigned he in Tisra. And so began the lineage of Omri over Israel. Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over the house of Israel for 22 years. And in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab the son of Omri to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, not the Ahaziah whose age is in question, reigned for a total of 2 years. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel and Samaria the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 2 years over Israel. Jehoram had reigned 12 years when Ahaziah, the offspring of the integrated kingdoms, became king of Judah. In the 12th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, did Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram king of Judah began to reign. When he add up the years of reign, Omri 6 years as the king over all the house of Israel, Ahab 22 years, Ahaziah the son of Ahab 2 years, and Jehoram 12 years. The total we get is 42. 2 Chronicles does not give us the physical age of Ahaziah, but his age in the lineage of the reign of Omri. The reason that the age of the line of Omri's reign over Israel is specifically noted with Ahaziah is because Ahaziah was the last king of this lineage in Israel. Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, would end his reign by killing Ahaziah. And it came to pass that when Jehu was executing judgment upon the house of Ahab and found the princes of Judah and the sons of the brethren of Ahaziah that ministered to Ahaziah, he slew them. And he sought Ahaziah, and they caught him, for he was hid in Samaria, and brought him to Jehu. And when they had slain him, they buried him, because said they, he is the son of Jehoshaphat, who sought the Lord with all his heart. So the house of Ahaziah had no power to keep still the kingdom. When we understand that the Bible gives us the information relevant to the question, and that the Bible does not contradict itself, the answers, while they may take some searching, through careful studying and understanding to find, are always there. There is no contradiction, no mistake, no copyist error. Copyists knew exactly what was meant to be there. After all, the Hebrew 22, which is whatever that is, would not be mistaken for the Hebrew 42. The age given in 2 Chronicles 42 is actually of importance to understand the age of the lineage of Omri's reign over the kingdom of Israel. Yet again, the Bible proves itself correct. So, number 6. How old was Jehoiachin when he became king of Jerusalem? 18 or 8. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months, and his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And in Chronicles, Jehoiachin was 8 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. So, too complicated for the critic. For a critic who doesn't like to study any context, supposing that the Word of God is like a vending machine, putting in a coin and the answer rolls out, it seems a contradiction that someone becomes king when he is 8 years old and again when he becomes 18 years old. How is this possible? Copy error? Of course, there have always been a mass of theologians proposing that 8 years can't be anything other than a copy error. However, by saying so, they are stepping over the golden rule of exegesis. Praestat difficula lectio, the difficult reading is preferable. Remaining within the rules of exegesis, we have to say that the two figures, 8 and 18, must be explained instead of erasing one of them. 2 kings. Jehoiachin wasn't the first who became king in his childhood under a regency. Jehoash under the priest Jehoiada, Josiah under his mother Jedidah. Remarkable is that Jehoiachin became king so young, while his father Jehoiakim was still alive and active as king. After governing a period of 11 years, Jehoiakim died at the age of 36 and was succeeded by his son Jehoiachin as active king, who was then 18 years. For 10 years, Jehoiachin had the title of king during his father's reign. What could be the reason for that? To understand this, we have to go back to King Josiah, the grandfather of Jehoiachin, and his sons, uncles of Jehoiachin, as described in 1 Chronicles. Let's read. The sons of Josiah were Johanan, the firstborn, the second was Jehoiakim, the third Zedekiah, and the fourth Shallum. The sons of Jehoiakim were Jeconiah, his son, and Zedekiah, his son. Before these verses, a list of kings is given, descending from King Solomon up to and including King Josiah. Apparently verse 15 was written when Josiah was still alive, to arrange the succession after him, and it gives 4 names representing the order of succession of his sons. He follows the diagram of verse 15. The suggestion is given that this order was inspired by their ages. The firstborn, Johanan, had the first rights, and so on down to the youngest, Shallum, also known as Jehoahaz, who got the last right to become king if the others died prematurely. This order of age is appropriate apart from Zedekiah, who was 13 years younger than Jehoahaz, and 15 years younger than Jehoiakim. The question is, of course, how is it possible that Zedekiah, who was actually younger than Shallum, got a higher place in the order of succession? What about Zedekiah? Zedekiah is called the son of Jehiah, but he's also called son of Jehoiakim. When we take this information seriously, and we do, we have to reckon with an extramarital affair. Diagram tree of verse 15 and 16 with the mothers of the princes. So Zedekiah, in 1 Chronicles 3:15, it says, Zedekiah was son of Hamutal, wife of Josiah, and Zedekiah was also a son of Jehoiakim. At the age of about 15, Jehoiakim begot Zedekiah by Hamutal, one of Josiah's spouses. In fact, Josiah became grandfather of Zedekiah and could be called his father by the rule, the son of a son is a son. Hamutal named the boy Mattaniah, meaning gift of God, but Josiah called him Zedekiah, meaning God is righteous. Zedekiah was on the list of succession immediately after his biological father Jehoiakim. When Jehoiakim would die as king, Zedekiah was his firstborn to succeed, and that gave him the unusual position on the list of succession, the queen ruling over the king. And it came to pass that Jehoiakim became king, his legal wife, Nehushta, wanted her legal son, Jehoiachin, to succeed, instead of Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's firstborn. Apparently she didn't trust her husband very much, and she insisted that Jehoiakim granted their son, Jehoiachin, the title of king without the duties, and her title of the mother of kings. Already in the year of Jehoiakim's enthronization, his son Jehoiachin, a boy of 8 years, got the title King of Judah. After the death of his father, he became king with all the duties at the age of 18. No Bible contradiction. So he was crowned twice. Number 7. How long did he rule over Jerusalem? 3 months or 3 months and 10 days. Jehoiachin was 8 years old when he began to reign. He reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name is Nehushta, and the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And in Chronicles, Jehoiachin was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. He did that which is evil in the sight of the Lord. I think the simplest explanation is that the author of 2 Chronicles 36 rounded to the nearest month. The chief of the mighty men of David lifted up his spear and killed how many men at one time? 800 or 300? These be the names of the mighty men whom David had. The Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains, the same was Adino, the Eznite. He lifted up his spear against 800, whom he slew at one time. In Chronicles, and this is the number of mighty men who David had, Jashobeam and Hachmonite, the chief of the captains, lifted up his spear against 300, and slain by him at one time. Well, these are two different people. One is Adino the Eznite, who was chief among the captains, who slew 800. The other is Jashobeam, the chief of the captains, who slew 300. And these are two different accounts written at two different times by two different people. If we look at 2 Samuel 23, verse 1, now these be the last words of David. David, the son of Jesse, said, and the man who is raised up on high, the anointed of God, of the God of Jacob, and the sweetest psalmist of Israel, said. So, written at the last words of David. In Chronicles, we have, so David waxed greater and greater, for the Lord of hosts with him. So it's talking about at different points in time, about two different people. Number 9. When did David bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem? Before defeating the Philistines or after? Check out this website here. It's describing the same events, but in a different order. And God sometimes does this. He'll give an overview, and then he'll go into more detail on something. It's this website here. The problem is easily resolved when you look at the events in their proper sequence. 2 Samuel is summarized. 2 Samuel chapter 5, 1-5 is a summarized history of the reign of David. 6-16 is the conquest of the Jebusite stronghold, Jerusalem. 17-25 is the battles between David and his Israelite armies and the Philistines at Baal Perazim and the valley of Rephaim. 2 Samuel 6, 1-11 is the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant from the house of Dinadab on a new cart, which is an unauthorized method that cost the life of Uzzah, into the house of Obed, Edom, the Gittite. 2 Samuel 6, 12-13 is the second time the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant from the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite into Jerusalem, the city of David. 1 Chronicles 13, 1 to 13 is the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant from the house of Adinadab on a new cart. The unauthorized method cost the life of Uzzah into the house of Obed-Edom. 1 Chronicles 14, 1 to 16 is the Chronicles writer deciding selectively to place the battles between David and his Israelite armies and the Philistines at Baal Perazim in the valley of Rephaim. And 1 Chronicles 15, 1 to 29 is the second time of the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant from the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite into Jerusalem, the city of David. It's the same events, just describing them in a different order, placing emphasis on different things. 10. How many pairs of clean animals did God tell Noah to take into the ark? 2 or 7. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee, and they shall be male and female, of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing of the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, to keep them alive. Genesis 7. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and of the beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. 8 and 9. Of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth, they went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. To answer this question, the clean animals and birds entered into the ark by 7s, while the unclean animals went into the ark by 2s. There's no contradiction here. Genesis 6:19 indicates that Noah was to take 2 of every sort into the ark. Then, 4 verses later, God supplemented this original instruction, informing Noah in a more detailed manner to take more of the clean animals. If a farmer told his son to take 2 of every kind of farm animal to the state fair, then instructed his son to take several extra chickens and 2 extra pigs for a barbecue, would anyone accuse the farmer of contradicting himself? Certainly not. It was necessary for Noah to take additional clean animals upon his departure from the ark after the flood, because he built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. If Noah had taken only 2 clean animals from which to choose when sacrificing to God after departing the ark, then he would have driven the various kinds of clean beasts and birds into extinction by sacrificing 1 of each pair. Thus, after God told Noah to take 2 of every kind of animal into the ark, he then instructed him to take extras of the clean animals, similar to how Genesis 2 supplements the first chapter of Genesis by giving a more detailed account of the creation. The first portion of Genesis 7 is merely supplements the end of the preceding chapter, containing several particulars of minute description which are not embraced in the general directions first given to Noah. So they went to the ark in 2s, male and female. As I understand it, there were 14 clean and 2 clean of each, 2 unclean, 14 clean and 2 clean, unclean of every type. When David defeated the king of Zobah, how many horsemen did he capture? 1,700 or 7,000? David took from him 1,000 chariots and 700 horsemen and 20,000 footmen, and David houghed all the chariot horses, but reserved them for 100 chariots. And Chronicles, and David took from him 7,000 chariots and 7,000 horsemen and 20,000 footmen. David also houghed all the chariots, horses, but reserved of them 100 chariots. So I found another website here. The apparent contradiction is frequently brought up by atheists and Bible doubters. I'll present 5 possible explanations. Sadly, one of them, frequently offered by Christians, as the first listed, believe there was a scribal error in the Hebrew manuscripts. This defense is offered by a group calling itself the Christian Think Tank. This is one of the last alleged major contradictions which version junkies feel sure we cannot answer. Many of them will stake their soul on this being proof that God cannot preserve his word in the English language, and they could lose their soul for their arrogance. If one of you are these reprobates, you have now at least 4 very rational discussions if you really want to believe God's word is pure. So number 1, first the written objection and then the answer. This particular Christian group is following the NASB reading. All the Christian sites I visited which our new version proponents agree there is a scribal error. Objection. 2 Samuel 8 and 1 Chronicles 18, Samuel says that David captured 17,000 horsemen, and Chronicles says he captured 7,000 in the exact same battle. 1,700 does not equal 7,000 no matter what you do, so one or the other must be in error. Again, you can claim copyist error, but it is yet another error in our current version of Scripture. So the Christian answer: yes, it is an error in one of the manuscript families, the Masoretic text, and other families, such as 2 Samuel in the LEXX, da-da-da-da. Hold on a second. Do I need to read all this? You can read it if you want to. This is the wrong answer. I don't want to go through the wrong answer. Well, let's just get down to the actual answers. So number 2, Matthew Henry. The horsemen are said to be 700, but 1 Chronicles 18 is 7,000. If they divide the horses by 10 in a company, as it is probable they did, the captains and the companies were 700, but the horsemen were 7,000. John Wesley commentary: 700 or 700 companies of horsemen, that is, in all 7,000, as it is being 10 in each company, and each 10 having a ruler or captain. Number 3, Peter Ruckman says on page 178 of his book Problem Texts that most of today's scholars say the number is 700 in 1 Samuel 8 is a scribal error. Then he asked if it never occurred to these men that professional soldiers might not be as stupid as Bible scholars. He continues, why wouldn't a war chariot have spare horses? What if both of them, and 4 to 6 in a harness, were killed? What do? Leave the chariot lying there in the mud? Obviously the Syrians have 10 horsemen per chariot. Observe exactly the same thing comparing 2 Samuel 10 and 1 Chronicles 19, 10 men per chariot. 2 Samuel 10 says, the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew the men of 700 chariots of the Syrians, and 40,000 horsemen. Then in 1 Chronicles we read, but the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew of the Syrians 7,000 men, which fought in chariots, and 40,000 footmen, so 10 men per chariot. Number 4, an explanation offered by Gerardus de Bow in the Book of Bible Problems. This is on page 84. Apparently the 6,300 were captured as a group, while the remaining 700 were captured at a different time. In support of this theory, he notes the differences in the language used in the two sections. 2 Samuel 8, it says, David smote Hadadezer as he went to recover his border at the river Euphrates, while in 1 Chronicles 18 it says David smote Hadadezer as he went to establish his dominion by the river Euphrates. So in effect he is suggesting that Hadadezer initially went to stabilize his control over the Euphrates, and David took his troops of 700 horsemen. Then Hadadezer sent another 6,300 to recover his previous dominion. These two were taken by David, making a total of 7,000. Here is another possible exception for the apparent contradiction. Seems more likely there was only one battle that took place between King David and Hadadezer of the king of Zobah. In one account we are told David took 700 horsemen, while in the other the number is 7,000. I believe an important part of the equation is that some footmen were also horsemen. They could either fight on horse or on foot, since they were specifically trained for both methods of combat. Those footmen who were also horsemen could then replace the number of fallen horsemen in the midst of battle, and we see this double role in another passage. In 2 Samuel 10:18, we are told of 40,000 horsemen of the Syrian army who were slain by King David and his men. In 1 Chronicles 19:18, the same number is listed as 40,000 footmen. These particular soldiers could fight either on foot or on horseback. When we compare 2 Samuel 8:4, the 7,000 horsemen taken with the number of 700 horsemen taken with the number of 7,000 horsemen taken in battle in 1 Chronicles 18:4, the difference can be attributed to how each writer is considering the men in question. The additional 6,300 men were trained as both horsemen and as foot soldiers. As horsemen reserves, they could be included with the 700, and so would be combined as a total of 7,000, but as foot soldiers, they would be counted among the 20,000. So how many horsemen were slain? 700, but also an additional 6 to 300 who were trained both as horsemen and footmen. The two different writers are giving two different views of the same events. Any one of these last four explanations could be the correct one, or perhaps there is another God has not yet been pleased to reveal to us. But there is no reason to doubt the accuracy of the King James Bible. We have all confidence that it is indeed the true and perfect word of the living God. Number 12. How many stalls for horses did Solomon have? 40,000 or 4,000? Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And 2 Chronicles 9. And Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. Found another website here. Did Solomon have 40,000 stalls for horses or 4,000? Yet another contradiction that people like to use against the Bible is the apparent discrepancy between the Bible recorded stalls for horses that Solomon had. 1 Kings, we are told that Solomon had 40,000 stalls. 1 Kings 4 verse 26, Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses. Here in 2 Chronicles, we are told he had 4,000. So that is a big error, some 36,000 stalls difference. This is another that is often put down to copyist error. Many modern versions correct this error here and change 1 Kings from 4,000 to 40,000, such as the NIV. Of course, in English it could be an easy mistake. After all, it's just 1 zero difference, 4 zeros instead of 3, or vice versa. However, the Hebrew is different. The words are written out. The Hebrew in this verse is da-da-da. Could happen in Hebrew. I'll skip down a bit. There's not a lot of explaining required and no deep study to understand this contradiction. It simply disappears when we look at the language used in the two verses themselves. 1 Kings, it said that King Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots. Clearly Solomon had 40,000 horses. However, 2 Chronicles says that he had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots. One says the stalls are for horses and for horses that were for the chariots, and the other says the stalls for horses and the chariots. The contradiction is resolved by a simple mathematical equation. 40,000 horses, 4,000 chariots with horses. 40,000 divided by 4,000 is 10. So there were 10 horses per chariot, like up above. Solomon had 40,000 stalls for the horses, 1 stall per horse. He also had 4,000 stalls for the horses and chariots together. When we just look at the actual text here, there's no contradiction at all. So number 13. In what year of King Asa's reign did Baasha, king of Israel, die? 26th year, or still alive in the 36th year? So in the verse in 1 Kings, we have the information that Baasha reigned for 24 years. His reign started 3 years into the reign of Asa, which would therefore mean that his reign ended in the 26th year of Asa's reign. We get this information in 1 Kings 16, verse 18, and we are told that Baasha's son Elah reigned. 1 Kings 16:18, in the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Elah, the son of Baasha, to reign over Israel in Tisra 2 years. However, we see that in 2 Chronicles it states that in the 36th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha came against Judah. Of course, it would be impossible for Baasha to have come up against Judah in the 36th year of the reign of Asa if his reign had ended with his death 10 years earlier, in the 26th year of Asa's reign. If we just stop and take these numbers at face value, there could be no doubt there is a clear contradiction. Many Christian apologists actually attribute this to a copyist error, like they do so many other numerical errors in the Bible. However, yet again, this is simply an easy way out of the supposed contradiction. It's very likely that those apologists have not even tried to reconcile these numbers together, or have failed to come up with an answer, and so resort to the copyist error argument. Either way, the assertion that the error was caused by a copyist is incorrect. This really is a lazy answer, and any apologist making this argument really isn't worth listening to. So how do we rectify these seemingly contradictory numbers? Well, yet again, we have to delve deeper into the text and search for the added information that will help us in correctly understanding why we have these two different numbers. We have to pay very close attention to the wording of the verses, the context, and the purpose of the information which the author is conveying. When we do this, we'll see that there is no contradiction, there was no copyist error, and the numbers are correct. The answer: Baasha came into power in the 3rd year of the reign of King Asa, and died in the 26th year of Asa's reign, as 1 Kings states. His son, Elah, reigned after him, as verse 6 in 1 Kings 16 states. So Baasha slept with his fathers and was buried in Tisra, and Elah his son reigned in his stead. This we already know from verse 8 was the 26th year of Asa. Yet obviously this does not coincide with the 36th year as stated in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles, however, unlike 1 Kings, is not referring to the literal year of Asa's reign. The 36th year is actually the 36th year since the division of the kingdom from the unified Israel into the northern tribes of the house of Israel and the southern tribes, the house of Judah. While the author of 1 Kings records the year according to the literal reign of Asa, the author of 2 Chronicles records the year according to the division of the kingdom of Israel into 2 kingdoms. When we look at the Hebrew in 1 Kings 15:33, there are 2 important things to note. Firstly, we'll see that the word translated as reign, malak, which means to reign as king, to become king or queen, or to reign as king, become king or queen. This is a literal reference as to when Baasha became king. He became literal king in the 3rd year of Asa. Here is the second point. It clearly states the 3rd year of Asa. This is a reference to the literal 3rd year of Asa's reign as king. Now let's look at 2 Chronicles 16 verse 1. The Hebrew word translated as reign here is malkuth, which means reign or kingdom. It is not referring to the literal reign of Asa as a king, but the reign of the kingdom of which Asa was a member, the kingdom that had started 36 years earlier with his grandfather Rehoboam. Rehoboam had become king of Israel after the death of his father Solomon. 2 Chronicles 9 verse 31, and Solomon slept with his fathers, and he was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead. Same thing in 1 Kings 11. However, Jeroboam and the northern tribes rebelled against Rehoboam, and this is where the kingdom was divided. And it came to pass, when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, they sent and called him unto the congregation, and made him king over all Israel. And there was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. We are told in 2 Chronicles that Rehoboam had established a kingdom. And it came to pass, when Rehoboam had established the kingdom, and had strengthened himself, he forsook the law of the Lord, and all Israel with him. The Hebrew word translated as kingdom is unsurprisingly malkuth, the same word as translated as reign in 2 Chronicles 16 verse 1. The author of 2 Chronicles is giving us the year as per the founding of the kingdom. Rehoboam reigned for 17 years. Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, a city which the Lord did choose out of all the tribes of Israel, to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess. Rehoboam's son Abijam reigned after him. And Rehoboam slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess, and Abijam his son reigned in his stead. Abijam reigned for 3 years. He reigned 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Micaiah, the daughter of Uriel of Gibeah. And there was a war between Abijah and Jeroboam. After the death of Abijah, Asa reigned in his stead. This is now the 20th year of the kingdom of Judah. So Abijah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. And Asa his son reigned in his stead. In his days the land was quiet 10 years. Reigned in both of these verses is malak, so referring to the personal reign of each king. So we see that there had in fact been 20 years since the founding of the 2 kingdoms, when Asa became literal physical king of the house of Judah. Baasha became king of the northern tribes in the 3rd year of Asa, which is the 23rd year of the kingdom of Asa, or rather the kingdom of the house of Judah. This means that Baasha's death, which we know occurred in the 26th year of Asa's reign, was in the 46th year of the kingdom. 20 years plus 26 years is 46 years. Therefore Baasha's death actually occurred a full 10 years after he had come against Asa in the 36th year of the kingdom, which is the 16th year of Asa's own personal reign as king. When we analyze the text correctly, there is simply no contradiction between these two numbers. How many overseers? Number 14. How many overseers did Solomon appoint for the work building the temple? 3,600 or 3,300. And Solomon told out 10,000 men to bear burdens, and 80,000 men to hew the mountain, and 3,600 to oversee them. And Solomon had 10,000 to bear burdens, and 80,000 hewers in the mountains, beside the chief of Solomon's officers, which were over the work, 3,300, which ruled over the people that wrought in the work. Well, I found another website here. Here it is asserted that the Bible records two different numbers for the same count, and so as they are recording the numbers of the same count, and the two numbers differ, one contradicts the other. Again, if we just stop at a very basic reading of these two verses, it may at least appear that there is a contradiction between the two numbers. Many apologists simply dismiss this apparent contradiction by attributing the discrepancy down to a copyist error. However, it really doesn't take much to show this assertion incorrect and actually understand why the two numbers, although being different, do not in any way contradict each other. Let's look at both verses in context. Solomon wanted to build a house for the Lord and for himself. We are told in both accounts that Solomon had 70,000 men that bore burdens, and 80,000 men that were hewers in the mountains. So the two authors agree on these two figures, but they seemingly disagree on the number of overseers. When we pay closer attention to the information that we are given, this discrepancy disappears. 1 Kings 5:16, we are clearly told that the number of 3,300 that ruled over the people is besides the chief of Solomon's officers. This differs from the number recorded in 2 Chronicles, where we see that there were 3,600 to oversee them. The Hebrew word translated as beside, bad, means apart, separated. Therefore, it can easily be concluded that of the 3,600 men that were appointed to oversee, 300 of these were considered to be chief officers, who were included in the count of 2 Chronicles, that did not distinguish between the chief officers and the overseers. So we can then deduce that all the chief officers were also considered overseers, but not all the overseers were chief officers. The number of men that each recorded differs because they are in fact not recording the exact same people with their count, and so the numbers recorded do not need to be the same. The author of 1 Kings recorded the number of overseers, but he excluded the number of chief officers from his count, while the author of 2 Chronicles made no distinction and included the chief officers within his count of overseers. So 15. Solomon built a facility containing how many baths? 2,000 or over 3,000? And it was a handbreadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, with flowers of lilies. It contained 2,000 baths. 2 Chronicles 4, and the thickness of it was a handbreadth, and the brim of it like the work of the brim of a cup, with the flowers of lilies. And it received and held 3,000 baths. I found a website here. First, we must note that baths here refers to a measurement of volume. One bath was apparently equal to 5.8 gallons, so the question is whether the sea held 11,600 gallons or 17,400 gallons. First Chronicles could be referring to the sea's capacity, and First Kings could be referring to how much water was typically kept in the sea. And there is an indication that a dry volume bath was smaller than the liquid volume bath used in ancient Israel. In the Targum it says it received 3,000 baths by dry measure and held 2,000 of liquid measure. Some suspect that during the Babylonian captivity the smaller volume bath became commonly used, and 2 Chronicles was written at the end of the Babylonian captivity, while 1 Kings was written before the captivity. Okay, so that's up to 15. I found this website. I was looking through, and I'll put a link in the description where somebody else has already gone through all of this stuff. But just take note, what have I done when there's these questions here? What have I done to find the answers? Well, the easiest thing to do is just to type the question into Google and then find somewhere where somebody's already gone through it. This is the benefit of Christians actually doing the work, because there are answers to these things. So this person has 101 contradictions. I've gone through 15 of them. If you think that there are other contradictions, if you think that the other ones are maybe there's some validity in them. Well, why don't you go through them yourself? I mean, I've proved that, 15%? 15 out of 15 that I've gone through have explanations that mean they're not contradictions. And all I did was go through, search the internet. I didn't even have, some of these I worked out for myself. Most of them I'm just, the work's already been done. It already exists. The information already exists out there. The answers to these supposed conundrums already exists on the internet. So there's really no excuse to this stuff. So as I said, I haven't gone through all of this article where somebody's gone through and answered all of these 101 things, but it's just an example of a website. So I'll put that into the link in the description. I haven't read it all, so I don't condone all of the answers in there. Well, I did notice that a lot of people, as was brought up multiple times, just wrote things off to a scribal error, which is the opposite of what we should be doing. That's a self-defeat doing that. Anyway, so there we go. Contradictions in the Bible. There's a bunch that are not contradictions. And I don't know, some of that's interesting, but it's interesting how they... You've noticed the type of things that they're picking out. They're not disputing things that I would consider are more important, like, the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's all these numbers and things. Anyway, I hope that was interesting. May Jesus bless you and keep you. Amen.
We're going to talk about how to do an effective search online. If your browser has a built-in search bar or supports searching in the address bar, you can use that for convenience. Or you can go straight to the search engine you want. I'm going to use Google. The truth is, Google is a very good search engine. Most of the time, it can find what you're looking for even if you don't know what you're doing. But it can't hurt to learn a few strategies. Say we're looking for recipes online, but we're not sure what we want to make. We'll keep it simple and just start typing the word recipes. This prompts the search box to give us a list of suggestions. Suggestions are great because they can give you an idea for a search that you might not have thought of. You can click one of the suggestions or just keep typing. As you can see, you don't need to worry about case, punctuation, or even using complete sentences. Hopefully we'll find some good cookie recipes. These are our search results. There are also some ads at the top, and sometimes you'll find them to the right too. If you see what you're looking for, you can click the link. If not, you may want to reconsider your search terms. For example, you could make them more specific or search for different words altogether. Suppose we don't want cookies with chocolate in them. We can tell the search engine to exclude those results by typing a hyphen or a minus sign, followed by the word we want to exclude. Notice that there is no space after the hyphen, so it's recipes, cookies, minus chocolate. This should have gotten rid of all the chocolate chip cookie recipes. There's still a pretty good variety to choose from. But I see there's sort of a sugar cookie recipe here, and that sounds really good. So I'm going to try searching for that to get as many recipes as I can. We want to put sugar cookies in quotes, so Google searches for that specific phrase. Otherwise, we might get results for other types of cookies that just happen to have sugar in the ingredients. These results look good because we have a lot of recipes to choose from, and they're all pretty much what we're looking for. However, we could refine them even more using the options below the search box. Here we have different types of content to choose from, like images, maps, and shopping. To view even more options, open the menu that says More. This is also where you can access special search tools that'll let you filter your results. These options will change depending on what you're looking for, giving you even more control over the pages, resources, and other things that you find. For now, why don't we do a visual search for cookie recipes by switching over to images? Now we can just browse through pictures to see if there's anything we like. These look really good. But wouldn't it be great if we could just watch a video to learn how to make cookies? We can do that. All we have to do is switch over to videos, again using the options near the top of the page. This will give us a lot of how-to videos, which should really come in handy. Now you can experiment with your own search terms. And just remember that most of the time, more specific search terms yield better results.